Okay, let's get the show started here. So this needs to be very interactive. I'm not going to stand behind the podium, and I want you to stop me and ask questions. We're going to pass stuff around. If we get to it, we might even do a chemistry reaction. Try to make it as fun for you guys as it is for me. I love to give these kinds of talks because, first of all, if I make a technical mistake, you're less likely to see it. And it's a lot of fun to get to talk to people about the work that we do and get some fresh input and feedback from people that I don't work with all the time. I will say one thing, working at Nist, people leave feet first. We have a tremendous tenure. If you stay more than 5 years at Nist, 80% of those people retire from Nist. So literally, there's people walking around 90, 95 years old, still coming into work every day. Actually, one guy got his 80-year pin. 80 years. Okay, so first of all, I have to say this, because if this gets out into the public, I have to say, I'm not endorsing anybody. Anything I say is not the official opinion of the Department of Commerce or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's strictly me telling you my professional opinion. And any commercial things that I mention, I'm not saying they're better or worse or good or bad, or they're just, I'm telling you what they are. Get my clicker so I don't have to go back and forth. Okay, so for those of you that don't know about Nist, it's a nice little place where all the geese are strong, all the deer are good looking, and all the scientists are above average. I wrote this talk on a Sunday listening to NPR. So we have, our first Nobel Prize was by Bill Phillips in 1997. In 2001, got another Nobel Prize to Eric Cornell. Then we had John Hall in 2005. And then finally we had Dave Winland just a couple of years ago. These guys all work in optical trapping, so they shine lasers through things and make atoms stay really, really still, which make them really, really cold. So they make the coldest stuff in the universe. Some of the temperatures they're able to reach are, sub-nanokelvin. So that's a billionth of a degree above absolute zero. Yes. Actually, each one of them, the first time I met Bill Phillips, I didn't know who he was. They're like, "Hi, Wyatt, this is Bill." I was like, "Hi, Bill, I'm Wyatt." And then he was at a seminar, and he started asking all these really intelligent questions. I was like, "That guy's really sharp." And so then after the talk, we were there, and I saw his badge, and I was like, "Oh, that Bill." I was like, but no pretense, no, just a normal guy. So we say that this is our half Nobel laureate because he's not a NIST staff person, but the research that he did that got him the Nobel Prize, he did at NIST. He's an Israeli citizen, and NIST cannot hire non-US citizens, so he was here on a sabbatical and then returned to the University of Tel Aviv. And then we have John Kane got the Kyoto Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize in material science. So it's a very prestigious prize. So that's just a few examples of the big names that you can find at NIST. So I'm going to do a little personal anecdotal vignette about what has happened in 4 generations. So from my grandfather to my father to me, I don't have any kids, so I'll use my nephew as a surrogate for that. For my grandfather, he was born in 1925, and the calculators that they had were it's called an addiator, and it was actually used primarily to calculate financial transactions in England back when they're on the pound, sterling, pence, this crazy I don't even know how they calculate the prices. But anyway, this was a gizmo that could do it. It was kind of cool in that one side you could do addition, and then you could turn it over, and the other side you could do subtraction. So it's almost kind of like, these iPhones, you turn them one way and the other way, and you get different functionality, so kind of cool. And then this one was the Kurta. Kind of looks like a pepper mill. And so you would slide in your numbers, and then you would crank it, and this mechanical apparatus would spit out a number. And so you could buy that in 1948 after World War II had finished up. And in today's dollars, it was $1,250. So it was not a cheap thing. Now you get a calculator for free. Let's see. Okay, so my dad was born in 1951, and he used slide rules when he was in school. Does anybody know how to use a slide rule?
I was supposed to.
I don't, but maybe I should. And so when he graduated from college, my grandparents bought him this calculator. And in today's dollars, it was about 150 bucks. So not terribly expensive, but not terribly cheap either. And I remember run on a 9-volt battery, or you could plug it into the wall. And I would play with it when I was a kid and get scolded because it was like his pride and joy. Now, so I was born in 1975. I've never used a mechanical calculator. I wouldn't know what in the hell to do with a slide rule. And when I was in high school, I used a TI-85. So this is one of these first graphing calculators. And so then if we go to my nephew, who was born in 1996, he thinks things that have buttons are weird. So he's not used to anything. A keyboard's okay, but even that, he prefers to type on an iPad than an actual keyboard, or not an iPad, but some kind of a touch screen. And so anybody have kids around that age? Do you know what they call the old phones, flip phones and handheld phones? It's maybe a little bit non-PC. So they call phones with buttons Amish phones. Actually, my boss has an Amish phone, and he teases me because he's like, you have to charge your iPhone every day. I can charge my phone once a week. I was like, well, you can only make phone calls with yours. I can do anything with mine. And he's like, it's an optimization problem. Do you want battery life or do you want performance? Okay, so I'm going to draw a parallel. I'm going to try to tell a story about how electronics developed since the past 50 years or so, because it's really pretty phenomenal what we can do now compared to what we could do when my grandfather was my age. And so in 1965, the co-founder of Intel Corporation, Gordon Moore, is still around, proposed what is known as Moore's Law, and that is every 2 years, the computing power available doubles. And so if we look at a chart of the development of computing power as a function, I wish my pointer was here. Oops. We can see back here in 1900, we had these mechanical calculators that were able to do, a calculation every 5 or 6 seconds. And then as we move up, and now these are the processors that are currently available, they're able to do around 10 to the 11 calculations per second. And so we're actually getting close to computers now that have the same, at least in theory, computational capability of a mouse. And then if we look, this is on a log scale though, so don't get too scared. We get up here, we're looking at a human brain. Now, one comment about Moore's Law. There's debate on how long it can continue. Because right now most processors are fabricated on what's called a 21 nanometer process. So that means it's able to make features that are 21 nanometers. So that's, if you took a meter, which is about a yard, and you cut that up into 1 billion pieces, and then you took 21 of those. So it's really, really, really tiny. And the issue now is that you get very, very limited by the purity of what you're making. Because if you think about it, 21 nanometers, you're looking at a few hundred atoms. So if you get one atom that's not the right atom in there, it's a big effect on your system. So while we'll be able to make these things smaller, it's going to become much, much more expensive. So they think we may be plateauing. Now that doesn't mean that Moore's Law is going to stop necessarily. What we need is some new algorithm for computing, some new platform. So rather than using transistors, using quantum computing, optical computing, and this is what a lot of the Nobel laureates focus on, is trapping these atoms so that they get into a particular quantum state that they can control. And so rather than operating with binary, transistors either on or off, you can have up to 8 different quantum states. So that takes your computing power up geometrically. Okay, so this is a fun slide, or a fun set of slides. So I checked on Amazon the other day, and you can get a 128 gig flash drive for $14. And just so you guys can look at, like, this is one of these kind of disassembled. You can see that the chip here is on this side, so you can pass that around. That one's not 128 gigs. Otherwise I wouldn't be giving it to you. But we can get that for $14, which is incredible. But if we wanted to build something like this in 1940, using 1940s stuff, we need 1.1 trillion vacuum tubes. And so what is it? Anybody know what a vacuum tube is? Okay, so these things are still in use, and some of the folks at Nist that are analog guys still talk about how digital electronics are crap and that the vacuum tubes are still the best way to go for a lot of things. So it looks kind of like a light bulb, and basically it does functionally the same thing as a transistor, but it takes a lot more power. It doesn't switch, it's not able to switch states as quickly, and it's big. So we can pass that around, you can look at it. They're not all that big. A more typical size is like, maybe like that or so. But this one's nice because you can see all the innards and parts. Okay, so we would need, by the way, that's about 150 vacuum tubes for each person. I recognize a face.
What do you mean 150 vacuum tubes for each person?
That means basically the population of the world divided by, just to put it in perspective. We need 2,500 square miles, which is roughly about the size of the state of Delaware. We need $4.7 trillion to buy all these vacuum tubes. That's using the price inflation adjusted. So the price of a vacuum tube in the 1940s, inflation adjusted to now, which is roughly the US military budget for 6 years. At least that's what's on the records. I know some people talk about whether or not that's accurate. We need 76.8 gigawatts of power. And to put that in perspective, that's about the power consumption of the country of Germany. So it would never happen. But just to put that in a little bit more perspective, we could fit the state of Delaware into a Jolly Rancher. It's about how big that thing is. We could fund the US military for 6 years for the price of a bucket of chicken, and power the country of Germany with about 3 AA batteries. So that is a really, really mind-boggling shift. And that's why these things would be completely unfathomable to somebody in the 1940s. Okay, so let me jump out of the clouds now because that's not an entirely fair comparison, but at least mathematically it's legit. So what caused this? It was a series of disruptive technologies. So somebody was doing something with pulleys and levers to do mathematical calculations, and they moved along and moved along and moved along, and then somebody said, hey, I got a new idea. And it totally changed the game and what people were able to do. So before 1940, the only switches we have were mechanical relays. And so basically this is an electromagnet. You apply power to the electromagnet, it moves a piece of metal to one side and closes a switch. You turn off the electromagnet, the piece of metal moves away from the other piece of metal and it opens the switch. They're big, they generate a lot of heat. They have moving parts. Moving parts are bad. A lot of electricity. They switch slowly because you've got to energize that magnet and then you have to physically move the lever over, and then when you turn it off you have to de-energize the magnet and then have a spring that pushes it back over. Short half-life because you got a moving part. Eventually that moving part wears out because it's slammed up against the other part too many times. And it's really difficult to integrate with other parts. So the first disruptive technology that we had was the vacuum tube, which is going around here. So we got rid of the moving parts, and because there's no moving parts, it has a much longer life and a much lower failure rate. And actually, there's these vacuum tubes from the 1940s that are still chugging along. And actually the guy that gave me the vacuum tube, who's a vacuum tube aficionado, was telling me, and I don't know if this is true, that because of their pristine switching ability, that on nuclear subs, they still use vacuum tubes to verify nuclear codes that come in to verify to authorize a launch. I don't know if it's true. I've never been on a Navy sub. It's probably classified anyway. So in the 1970s, we invented in 1953, Bell Laboratories invented the transistor. In about 1960, it became something that you could commercially buy. And we started to get integrated circuits. And so now we've removed, it's no longer a big thing. It's actually small. Let me pass one around, actually. My goodie box here. This is an old AMD chip. I don't remember. It's an Athlon. I don't know. When I bought it, it was probably, state of the art. Now it's worth nothing. Let me just point out. So this little silver part you see here, that's actually the meat, the computer part. It's about the size of a thumbnail. And then on the other side, we have all of these pins that allow the electronics to go in and out. So the actual chip itself is this small thing. All this other is just to interface it with the macroscopic world. So there you go. So if we make a parallel and we say a computer that existed around the time of the ENIAC, so in the 1950s or so, and we said that its speed was equivalent to how fast a snail could move, today's computers would operate at a speed that's roughly 250,000 times faster than the space shuttle upon re-entry into Earth. And I didn't do the exact calculation, but that might actually be violating Einsteinian speed of light type things. But we'll forgo that. Okay, now I want to say now, because, here, I'll take that one, since if I break it, that guy will kill me. I'm going to use chemistry and biology interchangeably now. I don't know, there's kind of a joke going around at one point that said, when I started college, I learned that physics was math, chemistry was physics, and biology was chemistry. So I'm going to use these things kind of interchangeably, especially because we're operating at the interface, right at the junction between what one would traditionally call biology and one would traditionally call chemistry. So here on the left is a picture of a chemistry lab at Harvard in 1902. And then on the right is a chemistry lab at the University of South Carolina in 2006. If you went and looked in my lab in 2014, it would look roughly the same as this, in that we've got dudes standing around beakers and test tubes mixing things. In 2006, we've got one big change. We now have a dude and a girl. Actually, where I work at Nist now, we're more female than male. It's about 55% female, 45% male. Back in the 70s, we have a picture of an auditorium at Nist with somebody giving a talk, and it said Nist Diversity Committee. And it's about 100 people all in black suits with a black tie, and then one guy with a white blazer. Not a girl to be seen. And then even this is unfathomable in today's world, but, and this is kind of the lore that I like to propagate. In the 50s and 60s, there actually was a Miss NBS contest. And so there was Miss Physics and Miss Chemistry and Miss Electronics and I don't know. And they actually had like sashes and beauty contests and just, I can't even fathom having that could even be thought of in today's world. But anyway, still operating in the same paradigm. We haven't had this big shift from, being able to fit basically all these books in this library onto a little device that you can buy at the grocery store. So what can we learn here? Is this? I have two versions of this talk, and I'm wondering if I'm on the right one. So electronics are nothing more than the interactions of electrons with various components. And then computers are basically sophisticated machines that allow the control of where electrons are moving and how fast they're moving and how many of them are moving and which directions they're moving. And that allows us to do some really amazing results to process information. So chemistry really is just nothing more than the interaction of different molecules with each other. Okay, so we control where molecules move, if they're allowed to mix, or if we separate them, or if we get them hot or get them cold, these different things. So can we make something analogous to this that would produce a sophisticated machine that would allow us to learn about chemistry and biology? Or also, this will be the last little bit, actually use these machines to do chemistry, to make things. Okay, so I realize this is a broad audience, so this is going to be maybe a little bit elementary to some folks, and maybe to other folks it'll be a reminder of your high school biology classes. So DNA is the blueprint of life. Oh, sorry, I need to back up and say one thing. I'm going to draw a parallel of how DNA sequencing technology has developed from when I was born in 1975 until today, and just how much has changed in those almost 40 years. Not 40 years yet. Not 40 years yet. Okay, so DNA is the blueprint of life. It's the informational molecule. It's what makes me not have hair and that guy back there have a full head of hair even though he's older than me. No offense. And it's made out of 4 letters. Mainly, there's of course there's exceptions and modifications, but we have the first one is adenine, or abbreviated A. These structures will be on a quiz later. I had to memorize them when I was an undergrad, so I think, you know, only fair. The other one is thymine, abbreviated with T. Then we have guanine, abbreviated with a G. And then we have cytosine, abbreviated with a C. And what should jump out at you is that the yellow and the blue kind of look similar, right? And the pink and the green kind of look similar shape. And that's because these two like to get together, and these two like to get together. And that allows us to create double-stranded DNA. But that's a little bit detailed. Okay, so the order of these letters in the DNA are the instructions. So if AAAGG or GGAAA are 2 different things. So I could take some English letters and say, tie your shoes. I can take those same letters and rearrange them and say, rouse ye hoist. Same letters, different order, completely different meaning. It's the same thing with DNA. You've got those 4 letters, but the order of those is exactly critical to what the molecule is able to do. By the way, this was probably the hardest part of making this talk, is finding something that actually made sense but wasn't offensive. A lot of 4-letter words were able to come out. Okay, so let's look at DNA sequencing and how did this all get started. It's first demonstrated in 1975 by a guy named Frederick Sanger at the University of Cambridge in England. He sequenced the genome of Phi-X174. Phi-X174, what the heck's that? It's a virus that attacks E. coli. It's a pretty simple virus. Its genome is 5,400 bases or letters long. And so in 1980, he got the Nobel Prize. But it was his second Nobel Prize. He got his first one in like 1957. One of the few people that has 2 Nobel Prizes. So what he demonstrated in 1975 was a very laborious, difficult, time-consuming technique. In 1977, there were two different methods that were developed, and up until about 2005 or so, they were the biggest workhorse technology. They were used in the labs when I was in grad school and when I was a postdoc even. So Walter Gilbert, who is a professor at Harvard, published his method in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science in February of 1977. And then Frederick Sanger published an updated method in December of 1977. So, you're like, in the scientific world, when you publish a paper just a few months after somebody published a similar paper, and they're both really good, we call that getting scooped, and it really, really sucks. Because you can imagine these guys work for 3 or 4 years on this project, and somebody beats you to the finish line. You're like, "Ugh." Actually, error is not the word you use, but they both got the Nobel Prize in 1980. So Frederick Sanger passed away about a year ago. Walter Gilbert's still running around. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain in simple. We're going to sequence a piece of DNA, a very short piece of DNA. Again, trying to come up with a word with only 4 letters. So I said Gaga Gaga Cat, or in parentheses Lady Gaga to make it, if you guys know Lady Gaga. Meat dress, crazy girl. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a bunch of copies of that. We're going to make 4 sets of copies. One copy set is only going to consist of pieces that end in A. So we have GA, GA, GAA, then we're going to create another set that only ends in T's. So we basically read out the piece of DNA until we hit a T, and then we stop. And then we're going to do the same thing for the C's, and then again the same thing for the G's. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to do a technique called electrophoresis. I want to make sure I was on the right slide. Actually, it may be easier to look up here. And so what that allows us to do is measure the length of the molecule. And so if we can separate and find out which molecules are short and long, or like which one is 1 base long, 2 bases long, 3 bases long, 4 bases long, and we know what the end is, we can read out that letter. So we put that in there, and we apply an electric field, and long pieces of DNA move really, really slow, but short pieces of DNA move fast. And so if we... If you put it in an electric field.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Electrophoresis, so what we do is DNA is negatively charged. It's a polyanion. So negatively charged, so if we apply a positive field here and a negative charge here, and we start the DNA in these little buckets, they'll start to move in this direction. And the smaller they are, the faster they go. These, the medium that they're in is called a gel, and it's basically looks like Jell-O. It's agarose or polyacrylamide. There's a lot of different chemistries you can have. But if I were to pass it around, I can't pass it around because a lot of it's toxic. But it would look and feel like Jell-O. But really stiff Jell-O, like the kind of Jell-O that you need to make Jell-O shots, if I'm dating myself. The alcohol doesn't let the Jell-O gel, so you have to add a lot. Anyway, we add the G's here, and then we apply the electric field, and they move, and based on the size, we know where they are. And we can see that each one is in a different place. So we've applied the electric field for a certain amount of time until they've all separated. And so this one here is the biggest piece of DNA, and it's in our teapot, T, letter T, not like English T. So we know that it ends in a T. And then our next shortest one is in our A pocket, so we know it ends in an A. Then number 3 is a C, so we know it ends in a C. Number 4 is again from our A pot, so we know that that molecule ends in an A. And we keep going and keep going through this. And what we finally see is that we get ga, ga, gag, a cat. So it's backwards, but we're able to read out that sequence. Okay, so in the mid-'80s, this was done in a technique called Slab Gel. So it was something, I think I got a picture of it here. Oh, cute. I must have been really happy with the animation. Really happy, yeah. Okay, so here's a picture of it. It's something about the size of a big sheet cake. And so you load your DNA up here and you apply the electric field and the DNA moves. So here's our challenge list here. It's slow. It uses radioactive labels. We don't like radioactivity. You have to pour these gels by hand. So you get graduate students that mix up the polymer in a liquid. And they pour it out into the cake pan. They let it sit. Then they peel it out, and then they put it into another device. They load in their DNA samples. They apply the electric field. They go home and they sleep for 4 hours. Then they come back into the lab, and they look at the gel, and they read out the gel just like I did for you, except these gels are now really big. And so that's the life of a graduate student back in the mid-'70s, if you're working in DNA sequencing. So in about 1980, a guy named Leroy Hood and his graduate student, Lloyd Smith, invented a technology that allowed you to do automated DNA sequencing. So now you could load up your gel, load up your DNA, go home and sleep for 8 hours, and then come back in and get a printout of what your DNA sequence is, and then you would repeat. It's slow, still very slow, but we've gotten rid of the radioactive labels and the manual preparation and data readout. Big step forward. So in the I actually did my PhD on capillary electrophoresis. So in the mid-1990s, they started doing these things in capillaries. And so a capillary is nothing more than a really, really, really skinny tube. And so if you can see, this right here is the capillary. It's barely visible in this picture, and it's taped onto this white plastic piece with electrical tape, just ordinary electrical tape. Actually, they were also using something akin to chewing gum at one point, or that sticky stuff you use to stick posters on the wall, the little tacky stuff. This is an actual capillary that you could use to do DNA electrophoresis. And I'll just pass that around so you can get the feel of it. The outside diameter is 360 microns, which is about the diameter of 2 or 3 hairs, human hairs, depending on how thick your hair is. The inner diameter is about 50 microns. So that's 5/1,000,000ths of a meter. And you can't see it, and it's taped up because it could poke you. You can actually cut yourself with them. And pass that guy around. So it's relatively slow, but not as slow. Get rid of this requirement to use a lot of chemistry a large amount of stuff, because instead of pouring out a cake pan full of stuff, you're filling this itty bitty tube with stuff. So you just need maybe a teaspoonful of material to run for months, rather than liters of material to run once. But the problem is that those silica capillaries, it's made out of quartz actually, are very sensitive to fouling. And so if you start to get junk on the inside of that tube, then you're no longer able to do the separation. So and the other thing is, you notice that that's one capillary. So you can only do one sample at a time. With that slab gel, you could have many different samples. So I liken it to the capillary version is like a Ferrari. It'll go really, really fast, but it's going to break down all the time, and it's only going to be able to carry 2 people. Whereas the slab gels are kind of slow, kind of clunky, but they work. It's like an 18-wheeler. So you can load it up with a bunch of stuff, and it's only going to go 65, 75 miles an hour, but it's going to bring a lot of stuff with it. Yeah?
I'm sorry, I have to ask a question.
Sure, please.
You said the big slab's going to carry a lot of...
Well, it's able to process a lot of samples.
what would these samples be? Cats, dogs, pigs, and horses? I mean, I don't.
Oh, pieces of DNA.
But
different
what
DNA.
What DNA? Cats, dogs, pigs, and horses? You know,
Okay, so
I need to have
okay, yeah. So
a reference.
when we do a DNA sequencing analysis, we need to separate a lot of different DNA samples. Okay, and the more of those that we're able to separate, the more information we're able to get. So I can separate one sample really fast, or I can separate 32 different samples really slow. But in the end, I'm producing the same amount of data per time.
Right. Oh, that I understood.
Okay.
But what DNA are you looking at? DNA of.
Whatever you wanted to look at.
Well, what's the purpose of doing this?
Okay, so if we read out the DNA code, we can sequence the genome. We can tell what kind of phenotype or what kind of characteristics that organism is going to have. So you can predict eye color, hair color, skin color, propensity for certain disease types, a lot of stuff.
Okay.
Is that clear? Okay, cool. Okay, so then when I was in grad school, people started doing these things in 96 capillary arrays. And anybody know why they chose 96? Seems like an odd number. People like to pick like 10 and 100 and 1,000 because it sounds official. That's a good answer. That's pretty much it. So everybody does their analysis in what's called a 96 well plate. So that means that we're doing 96 different pieces of DNA in a standard form factor. And so what that allows, so people bend their work in units of 96. So if you got a sample tray with 96 samples and you can do 96 capillaries, you're off to the races. This is actually, this was an instrument that I had in grad school called a mega base, because it was able to produce 1 million bases of DNA information, so it was able to read out 1 million letters of the DNA code in one day. And we thought we were that word. And this guy cost about $250,000 back then. You can see the 96 capillaries that are dipped down into this 96 well plate where the DNA is. There's an electric field applied, the DNA, all 96 different pieces of DNA move through that capillary. There's an optical scanner here that detects them, and then they go here into a waste container. What's next? Okay. So it's still slow, but we've gotten rid of the limited sample capacity, so we're able to look at 96 pieces of DNA rather than just one. But it's still finicky, because now you have 96 capillaries all in one unit. One of them goes bad, then you get 95 pieces of DNA. Two of them go bad, then you get 94. And eventually at some point you say, well, time to swap out the arrays. That makes the company really happy because they can sell you these things at a crazy price. Makes you really sad because you have to spend a lot of money and you have to swap it out and do a whole bunch of realignment and recalibration and readjustment of the instrument. But these were the instruments that did the initial Human Genome Project. So up in Rockville, there was a company called Celera. They had hundreds of these things running 24/7. And then there was Tiger, which was the Institute for Genomic Research, which was the government effort. They had thousands of these things as well. Applied Biosystems and Molecular Dynamics were the two companies that made these instruments. They made a lot of money. And they're actually in cahoots with other people as well.
What's the Human Genome Project?
Okay, so the Human Genome Project started in about 1990, and it was an initiative put forward by President Clinton to sequence the human genome in its entirety. So the human genome is about 3 billion bases long. And we wanted to find out, nobody had done it before, so we didn't know what the library of the human code was. And so there was a huge initiative that cost about $13 billion, and it took well over 10 years to read out all those 3 billion bases. They sequenced the genome of a single female, who I don't know if her name is known or not, but that one lucky person was the first person to get their genome sequenced. And it cost us, like I said, 13 billion with a B dollars. So in the 1990s, and this is what I did my research on, is that we started to move these into microfluidic devices. So I'm going to pass a couple of these around. Don't give these back to me because we're going to do a demo in a little while, and I want you to have at least one that you can look at with your neighbor. And I'll explain what these things are. Did I? Might have to share more. You guys don't need to see it. Neither do you. These guys work in my lab, so. They work in our lab, sorry. Okay, so if you can kind of rub your finger on there, you can feel some like grooves on one side, unless it's a sealed chip. Some of them might be sealed. I don't think I gave you any sealed ones. But you can kind of feel those grooves. Those grooves are actually the tubes. So what we've done is rather than make, using one of those glass capillary tubes, we've actually made a tube in this device. Now, what does that gain us? There's one big change. We go from a one-dimensional system, where the only thing we can control is the length of the tube, to a two-dimensional system. So now we can make things that go this direction and this direction and this direction. So now we can start playing games about, rather than just moving a DNA molecule in one direction, we can start to shuttle it around in different directions. And that allows us to start to do a lot of new cool stuff. And so we started doing, where'd my clicker go? Started doing DNA sequencing in these devices. It solved all of the problems except it was damned expensive, really expensive. Because this little guy here, this is a silicon one, not the plastic one that you guys, guess how much this guy cost to make? We use the same techniques that you'd use to make a microchip. So when they make a microchip, they fabricate it on a wafer that's of a certain diameter, and then they cut it up into 1 million pieces, because they make 1 million chips on that, and then they package them up. So when you fabricate, let's say a 12-inch wafer, and then you cut it up into, I don't know how many chips they get off of a 12-inch wafer, but you're able to amortize the cost of that chip fab over all of those devices. And so you can sell a chip for a couple of bucks rather than that. So this actually costs about $10,000 to make. You want to hold it? Don't drop it? No, it's already broken. That's why I use it as a demo. I got another one. Yeah, so
One has some kind of a backing on it. The other one just looks like glass.
yeah, so this one's made out of a material called silicon. It's this material that computer chips are primarily made out of. These, in order to get around this $10,000 cost, we tried to start making them in plastic so that they were cheap, because plastic's cheaper than this. Yeah, you're one slide ahead of me, I think. Oh yeah, you are. Okay. So this is actually a version of the chip that's passing around under a microscope, okay? And so remember I said we were able to start, now that we have a two-dimensional system, we can start to move DNA in different directions because we can make an intersection, a T or a Y or whatever you can dream up. So get your chips out. So if you look right here, and oh, I forgot, shoot. So no pride, no shame. I have to use these. So this is just a jeweler's loop, so you can look up if, maybe make it a little easier to see. They're coming back to the left, don't worry. Actually, I was with Abe in the lab the other day, and we were looking at a computer screen to get data, and I didn't have my glasses on. And I had to finally zoom the screen, and my boss is standing back behind me, and he started to make a comment about my eyes starting to, and I was like, shut up, quiet. So that's why I use the jeweler's loop. Anyway, how are we doing on time? Oh, I need to move fast. So if we apply a voltage, we load our DNA. The DNA in this case is labeled green, okay? And so there's a mixture of DNA in here, and we're going to separate that DNA. We apply a voltage in this direction. And so if you look at one edge of the device over here, you can kind of see a little cross where the holes are, where there's a bunch of like 16 holes there. We're only looking at one of those lanes, not all 8 of them. So we apply this voltage from north to south, and then at a certain time we're going to switch, and we're going to apply the voltage from west to east. And so what's going to happen is that the DNA that's caught in this little intersection here is going to start to move down this direction. And so, just so you know, a typical DNA sequencing run takes about an hour to do with the traditional techniques that we've been talking about before. And I'll show you how long it takes to do with this. Gonna go. Okay, so we switch the voltage right about there, and you can see the DNA moving down there. And here in just a little bit, you can start to see the different pieces of DNA up here, and you get these bands.
What are those big green blobs?
Dirt.
Oh, okay.
Simply just dirt. This is under a microscope. So, and it's a fluorescence microscope, and so lots of things fluoresce. Dirt is one of those, and it's impossible to keep these things perfectly clean. There's techniques for getting around that, but this is being done in a microscope. Actually, when I was doing this work, we had the world speed record for DNA sequencing. I had it for like 3 months. Yeah, I haven't sped it up or slowed it down. It's because of the way the microscope operates, that's why you get this kind of pulse. Yeah, frame rate. Sorry, thank you. Brain freeze.
Yeah, that's because it's like a pulse.
Yeah, that's because it's taking a picture every couple of seconds, because the way it works, it takes a while to scan the whole image. Okay, so Nist is kind of a fun place. So I had given this talk at an internal division meeting, and one of these guys, he started working at Nist in 1950, and this would have been in 2002, so the guy's been around for a while. His name was Wolfgang Heller from Austria. He's most famous for creating controlled pore glass. Kind of cool. So I had presented this, and this older gentleman, at that point I didn't know him, he approached us and he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, "I'm really glad to see you guys are starting to work on this stuff again." And then he showed me this, which was back in the 1950s, when he had just started working at Nist, was a top secret gizmo. I'll pass it around. Be a little bit delicate with this because it is kind of special to me anyway. So what is this gizmo? Nist back then was called National Bureau of Standards, and it housed the Diamond Ordnance Laboratory, or Diamond Ordnance Fuse Laboratory. So what's a fuse with a Z? It's a device that was credited with winning World War II next to the A-bomb. And so what it is it controls when a bomb explodes. They used to just drop a bomb, and when it hit something, it blew up. Then they started putting in these devices that would tell it to blow up when it reached a certain altitude, or a certain velocity, or a certain whatever parameter you wanted to set. They only used them over water, though. They never used them on land because they were worried that one of them would fail and the Germans would find it and reverse engineer it and lose the secrets. And it moved to the Army in 1952. So here's a picture of that guy. And so what is it? It's actually an analog pneumatic computer to control the detonation of a bomb in the case of a nuclear attack. So if you're not familiar with, if a nuclear bomb goes off, you get an electromagnetic pulse, and all electronics go crazy. So this was a backup device, so if the Russians nuked us, we could nuke them back without the effects of the EMP. That's that's why it's fun to work at Nist, is because you show this stuff you're really, really proud of, and some old guy comes in and says, oh yeah, we were doing that, when your dad was a kid. Okay, so here's where we are in the first 30 years of DNA sequencing. In 1975, it took to sequence 5,000 bases. Took more than a year. Took a world-class, a Nobel laureate research lab in England. And God knows how much money it cost, because you can't calculate that. And then in 2005, using that megabase, we could sequence 1 million bases in one day with one technician for about $1,000. So if we take this snail speed analogy now, sequencing in 1975 moved at a snail's pace. In 2005, we were moving at about 2 times the speed of the Concorde. This is really, really good, but it's also really kind of not good, because we're doing the same, we're still doing the basic same thing. We're putting DNA in an electric field, moving it and separating it by pieces. There hasn't been a fundamental change. We haven't gone from a vacuum tube to an integrated circuit, or from a mechanical computing device to a vacuum tube. There hasn't been a big voila until about 2005. So I would say that DNA sequencing just went through something akin to the introduction of the integrated circuit. In 1970, Intel came out with the first circuit. So if we look at this chart, this is a log chart of the cost it takes to produce a megabase of DNA sequencing. Here's a pseudo Moore's law. So that means that every 2 years the price cuts in half. And we see that from 2001 till 2005, when we were building these capillary and microchip-based systems, we were decreasing the cost pretty close to Moore's law. And then something happens right around here. What happened? The price all of a sudden drops down to nothing. There was a new disruptive technology that came around. And it was the ability to, rather than taking a big group of DNA molecules and separating them, we were able to take a single molecule of DNA and interrogate it. Take one molecule of DNA and read its bases out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's kind of cool. But we were able to do that, take 1 million pieces of DNA or tens of millions of pieces of DNA, and then read each one of their sequence simultaneously. So we're reading each individual piece of DNA 1 million pieces of DNA individually at the same time. Phenomenal. Why are we able to do that? Or how are we able to do that? I would say that's because we're starting to blur the lines between the biologists and the chemists and the physicists and the material scientists and the computer scientists. 20 years ago, a biologist and a chemist used different languages. Just like I'm using a different language. I'm trying to do my best, but probably I'm using some language that's a little confusing sometimes. So now, we can sequence, so if we go back to the 1975 analogy and say that's a snail's pace, right now we can produce 3 billion bases of DNA information in one day with one technician for $1,000. 3 billion bases of DNA is the human genome. So in theory, and it's not exactly doable, but in theory you could do that for $1,000 in a day. So now we're at 4 times the space shuttle at re-entry. Not 250,000 times, but at 4 times. But hey, 5 years ago we didn't have iPhones. Everybody's running around with a BlackBerry. Yo.
What enabled in that, there were 2007, 2008 time frame, what enabled someone to extract one piece of DNA out of the whole string? What was the technology that allowed the extraction? Okay.
Good. No, these are great questions. Please ask these questions. So here's a picture of one of these actual devices. I could not get a copy of the video. because they block all this stuff up. There's the functional device. So if we go back, sorry. So here's the actual instrument. So it sits, it's like yay by yay. These folks actually use the inkjet printer model. They sell you the instrument for free, or almost free, but then the kit that you have to use to do it, they charge out the wazoo for it. What's that? This one is called an Illumina. There's about 5 different vendors that make them, and they all operate on the same procedure of reading out each base on a single piece of DNA, and then doing that on millions of pieces of DNA. But they interrogate it differently. Some of them do it electronically, some of them do it optically, some of them do it enzymatically, a lot of different ways. So here's the gizmo, the actual device, and this is a standard ink pen, just so you get an idea of scale. And what happens is you tie a bunch of pieces of DNA onto the surface, and you take 1 million copies. I'm not going to go into the details of how they do it, but you take 1 million copies of a single piece of DNA, and you put that in one spot. And then you take 1 million copies of another piece of DNA, same piece of DNA, and you put that in another spot. And then you take an enzyme that reads off the DNA bases, and each time it sees a different DNA base, it flashes a different color. So, when you see a pink flash, there was an A. And you see a purple flash, there was a T, whatever. And you put a camera on there, and what you get, it looks like static on an old TV screen, on an old-fashioned, where you got all sorts of different colors flashing all over the place. That's what it looks like. And each one of those pixels, as that color changes, is telling you what the sequence is on that particular DNA. You then log all that data, you feed it into a huge computer, and it reassembles it all. It's like the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle. Really pretty cool. So here's where it fits into this is actually where it fits in. So this is, about that big. And you hit go, and that's, come back in a couple hours, and you've got your billions of bases of DNA information. Unfathomable when I was in grad school. We were working on this, and we would get to where we could make 1,000 bases in a couple of hours, and we thought, wow, we're really rocking. And then somebody publishes a paper where you're like, I'm done. This technology is at its end. The vacuum tube has been replaced with the integrated circuit. Okay, so now this is going to be maybe a little bit more different, more fun maybe. So can we use chemistry to make stuff? Use these new chemistries to make things? Oh shoot, I didn't, that's okay. And so what I'm going to talk about now is something called a liposome. And a liposome is nothing more than an artificial cell. It's basically a little nano container, a little small scale container made out of lipids, or if you see, they're like advertised in alpha hydroxy lipid therapy and skin creams and this kind of stuff. It's that basic same kind of stuff. But what's cool about it is it's a tiny, tiny container, and whatever's on the inside can't get out, and whatever's on the outside can't get in until you change something. So you can open and close them, permeate them, but in general they stay solid. Okay, so the current state of the art involves you take the precursor component of a lipid, so you have these individual lipid molecules that are completely happy, and you put them into a different solution, and they're no longer happy. And they start to, rather than being individual lipid molecules, they start to glom up together and become these liposomes, these spherical containers, if you will. The problem with that is when you pour that in, you mix those two fluids, there's no way in heck that you can mix the fluids exactly the same over and over again when you do it with test tubes type things. It's just the physics aren't there. So I'm going to show you this, maybe, we'll see if this works. It worked in my kitchen last night. So what I'm going to do is a crude, uncontrolled mixing of two solutions. These are non-toxic. One of them I know you've eaten. The other one, you've at least soaked your feet in it. So we have a clear solution. And I'm just going to, without any control, pour in my second solution. It's going to make the ions in this solution unhappy. And they're going to turn into crud. And then I'm going to pass this around. And you can look at how different these sizes are. The chunks in there are huge, different sizes. By the way, that's Epsom salts and baking soda. So, and water. So what you have to do is when you mix the lipids and you get this crap, this junk, is that you have to process it to make them all the same size, because it's critical that they're the same size, because when you put them into a person, you want them to be of a controlled size and the same size. Otherwise, well, the first order, you clog the plumbing. You actually get an embolism. The other thing is that they'll get cleared by the renal filtration system, or the liver, or the lungs, or the spleen, depending on the size. They can trigger an immune response. They can do all sorts of nasty things. So you get this gizmo here that weighs about 50 kilograms. It's about a cubic meter in size. And it will basically force these things through membranes that cause them to become of unique size. Okay, so that process takes a couple of hours. And you have to buy this big, big box. But if we mix these two things in a microfluidic system or in one of these microchip systems, we're able to do the mixing in a controlled way and do it the same every time. So no longer do I have a jar full of junk. I have whatever's coming out of my chip is of controlled size, and it's all the same size. So I'm going to pass this around. If your jeweler's loops are still there, they could be useful. It's going to look kind of like a Y. And what I'm showing you here is a T, but it's the same basic idea. We're going to flow in our lipid solution, and then we're going to flow in another solution that makes the lipids unhappy, and they're going to self-assemble into the liposomes. Pass that guy around. And so schematically, what is happening is we're flowing in one fluid in this direction, and then we flow in our second fluid in this direction, and they start to mix at this interface. But rather than mixing in a big splashy, crazy way, they're mixing in a very smooth, uniform, nice way. And so what's the application to this? Let's take medical imaging. So this is a positron emission tomography, or a PET scan, of a rat with junky, bad liposomes, so something like that. And what you see is that almost all of the radio probe that's trying to visualize the rat, so they inject a tracer or some kind of a probe into the rat, is getting caught up in the liver. You can kind of make out the femoral artery, maybe something here, but the liver is lit up like mad. But if we take those, we use some device to make those liposomes tiny and of controlled size, and we squirt them into the rat. This isn't my picture, by the way. These are my pictures. So now what we can see on the rat, so now we've made the good liposomes, and this was actually made with a device just like the one that's being passed around. So we were able to make this and basically plug the chip directly into the rat, rather than making this stuff in this big radio pharmacy with this big clunky machine and then carting it over to the operating room and then injecting it into the patient. So we can see we get very clear, we can see the ventricular septum, we can see the femoral artery, the carotid artery, get a little bit of kidney uptake. We can see it's a boy rat. And then over a period of about 4 hours, that radio probe starts to dissipate, and it's actually osseous uptake, so it gets take it into the bone. This is a fluoride probe. So the same reason that you use fluoride toothpaste, because it attacks to the bone. Well, it's starting to stick into the bones of the rat. And it's actually sticking in at the growth plates because that's the least porous part of the bone. So you can actually start to see the skeleton at that point. You would never do a PET scan to see a skeleton, though. Just do an X-ray. I know this was a little bit cursory, but I'm out of time. And I think there we go. Okay, I don't do this stuff by myself. A lot of folks I work with, Nist is a great place, really like it there, Material Measurement Laboratory. Do a lot of work with University of Maryland College Park, the different NIH institutes, and then I have a burgeoning but really growing collaboration with a university called Unicamp in Campinas, Brazil, which is the biggest university, one of the biggest universities in Brazil. Campinas is about 2 hours west of São Paulo. So they send students up, and I get to work with them.